Hello, welcome back to Wolf's Corner. I am your host, and today I am going to continue the story of the Siege of Vraks. Last time we talked about the events before the siege that led to the Imperium having to attack their own world. Now we're going to talk about the preparations of both the Imperium and Cardinal Zaphan's followers to either retake or defend Vraks respectively. To start off, let's talk about why I feel this is the perfect representation of warfare in the Warhammer 40k universe. When planning out the campaign to retake the world, those wonderful sloths in the Administratum considered only one thing. How many men/women must die for the world to be retaken? Every single objective, step, or maneuver of the Imperial plans were reduced to a simple calculation of number of dead each thing would cost. The lives of the guardsmen fighting this campaign were about as important as the number of shells a battery of artillery went through. Valued to an extent, but ultimately the two are just numbers on a clerk's chart. Furthermore, the clerks and planners on Terra determined that the campaign should take 12 standard Terran years to complete. Because obviously every time a military plan meets an enemy, it always works out the way they planned. Think about this for a second. If you went to a military command in this day and age and said, "Okay, generals, we have made a plan that sees thousands upon thousands of your soldiers dying for each objective we set out for you. Oh, and your campaign will take 12 years to complete." You'd be thrown out the room so fast that you would ask why your pants are still standing freely in the room while you were sailing through the air. But in the Imperial Administratum, this is Wednesday. Now, the thing they needed to do was find the guardsmen to actually fight the campaign and be willing to accept the casualty list they had planned for. Lucky for the Administratum and the rest of the Imperium, there were Imperial guardsmen who were perfect for this task. These were the guardsmen known as the Death Corps of Krieg. These guardsmen had absolutely no regard for their lives, as long as they could serve the Imperium. To give an idea of what sort of people we're talking about, people on Krieg tried to secede from the Imperium over 1,000 years before the Siege of Vraks, but loyalist elements on the planet said no thank you to that, and responded with a nuclear assault on the rebels that was followed with a civil war that lasted over 500 years. And to top it all off, when the world was finally returned to the Imperium, the people of Krieg offered the Administratum not one regiment, as they thought that was all the irradiated world could provide, but 20. You can imagine that the sloths in the Administratum probably had a bit to explain to their superiors about the large wet stain on their pants after that announcement. And to show even further how much they did not care about their own lives, each guardsman in a Death Corps regiment has a number instead of a name. And instead of medics, they have quartermasters whose job it is to go out and strip off any useful equipment from dead or dying soldiers. These are troops who do not give a shit about their lives. All that matters is the success of the mission. What better troops to use for the reconquest of Vraks? So the Imperium began putting together the 88th Siege Army, made up exclusively of guardsmen from the Death Corps. For the plans of the Administratum, the units in the army were designated as siege regiments. So even if the unit was composed mainly of infantry, each would still get a shit ton of artillery pieces and other things necessary for a long, drawn-out war. For the siege, the army was originally made up of 32 regiments and 14 artillery companies. Each regiment had artillery companies with everything from massive bombard cannons right down to small infantry mortars. The most important weapon for the Imperial forces would be these weapons. To give the army even more power, the Administratum included those 14 artillery companies. Because when you're besieging a world, you can never have enough big boom. Now, despite the focus on artillery, the siege army also included armored regiments that were factored into the planning by the Administratum. The Death Corps did not intend to have any large-scale battles with the traitors' armored forces. The tanks were going to be used as a tactical battering ram for taking advantage of every hole that the artillery blew open. Of course, even with all these preparations, the commanders of each regiment already knew how many of their men would die for each single objective they were going to fight for on Vraks. Not exactly the most encouraging battle plan, but for the Imperium, it was an acceptable reality. And to give you an idea of how large these units are, the 1st Regiment to deploy to Vraks was composed of 200,000 men, and the Imperium was sending 32 of these things to Vraks. Yeah, that's a lot of Death Corps troopers coming to Vraks to kick Cardinal Zaphan right between his ropes. But while the Imperium was gathering this army together, things were happening on Vraks that would make things all that much harder for the Death Corps. After the secession of Vraks from the Imperium, the next few months on the planet could be best described as the biggest clusterfuck you've ever seen. Leaders in the forces now loyal to Cardinal Zaphan began to fight each other to become the newest stooge for Zaphan's circle created by Mammon. The ones who proved themselves the most loyal, usually by killing their competition and or prove that their competition was less loyal to the cardinal than them, were rewarded with positions of power. The ones seen as the best over all their fellows were inducted into the disciples of Zaphan, or if there were no spots open for them, they were made enforcers. Basically, they were either made into a religious stooge or an enforcer given open season to kick around anybody among the traitor forces who even glanced at them in the wrong way. Once this shitstorm finished, Zaphan's followers began to prepare the defenses of Vraks for coming imperial retribution. To encourage his followers, apostate Cardinal Zaphan declared that he wanted Vraks to become a slaughterhouse and warned them that they could expect no mercy from the Imperials. And as any good religious demagogue does, the cardinal promised great rewards for those who fought well, and threatened execution to those who failed. Like so many revolutions promising freedom and independence, the people of Vraks quickly learned that the freedom promised was only for a few people that got close to the cardinal. For the labor gangs, the chains of the Imperium were quickly slapped back onto them, now with the cardinal seal on them instead. And like before, they were put to work building new defense lines, laying mines, and spreading razor wire all over the place. At the same time, the newly named Vraksian renegade militia prepared itself for the coming Imperials. As I mentioned in the previous video, Vraks was an armory world, so it was packed to the brim with all sorts of weapons. And now those weapons were taken by the traitors to be turned on the Imperium. For the most part, these were second-line weapons like autoguns and some old tanks. However, the traitors also gained access to large numbers of various pieces of artillery, chimeras, and Lehman Russ tanks, thanks to those being stored at Vraks before they were sent off to various war zones. So it would not be a pushover for the Imperium retaking this world. While the Imperial troops were all from the world of Krieg and thus given the same equipment, the new army following Cardinal Zaphan was more of a hodgepodge of troops. The best quality troops serving the apostate cardinal were the disciples of Zaphan. These fanatics numbered around 50,000 or so, and had the best equipment that could be looted from the armies of the world, including plasma and power weapons. These would be the core of the renegade cardinal's army, and would be hailed as his champions during the fighting. After the disciples, the second best troops for the renegades was the original planetary garrison. This was made up of 10,000 former guardsmen and 500,000 planetary defense or PDF troops. These troops had more training than most of the renegades, but they were not to the same standard as the Death Corps troops in terms of quality of equipment or training. The bureaucrats of the Imperium thought these troops would only be able to man a defensive line and thus would simply be troops that needed to be attacked. Oh, how wrong they would be proven over the campaign. These two groups were the main troops of the traitor forces. Oh, but we're not done with the sort of troops the Cardinal had following him. The third group of bodies available to the renegades came from the labor corps that were now building defenses for them. This labor corps was roughly 1,500,000 bodies available for the traitors. Many of these people volunteered or were dragged off the construction lines to become new militia members after getting some of the weapons they looted and were thrown onto the line. Because of course, these laborers had the most to lose now. First, they were slaves to the Administratum, then they were slaves to the Cardinal. Not exactly hard to convince them to pick up a gun and fight if it freed them. But again, these are little more than random builders being told they're now soldiers. They would bolster the lines, but nothing more than that. However, there was one very big thing that these labor corps gave the traitors that would be a nightmare for the Kriegsmen: Ogrons. The Administratum had placed a large number of Ogrons to the construction battalions on Vraks, and now that the Cardinal rebelled against the Imperium, his staff ordered that all the Ogrons were rounded up. These massive abhumans were then subjected to various surgeries and implants. When the Ogrons came out of the surgical rooms, they had been made into mindless berserkers with only a desire to kill before they themselves died. Because when you see a very large and powerful human being with skin so thick that explosive shells just bounce off them coming towards you, naturally the thing you want is that giant having one hand replaced with a buzzsaw, the other having razor-sharp spikes sticking out of it. Oh yeah, and this big guy's pumped so full of drugs that he'd make a coat head seem stable. These giants would become real terrors on the battlefields of Vraks. The final group of regular human troops that made up the Cardinal's army was a force made up of the pilgrims that had come on the world, to seek the blessing of the St. Leonis' shrine and the workforce of administratum bureaucrats and administrators. The pilgrims often joined the Frateris militia the cardinal had called the Basilica to raise. They thought that the world was under threat, and soon true traitors to the imperial creed would come to Vraks. These were by far the worst quality troops the Death Corps would be facing, but after getting some guns and being encouraged by the cardinal's preachers and brutal enforcers, they would be able to hold a defensive line. Then again, they were not given all that much equipment. They were little more than bodies to fill holes in the lines. How nice it is to be a pilgrim to Vraks at this time. Come to the world to seek the martyred saint's blessing. Get told the world is under threat, and filled with religious zeal, you volunteer for the Frateris militia that the cardinal of the sector has called up. Now, part of the militia, you find out that you're going to have to stand in a trench and fight off heretics. Oh, and you get very little equipment or training. Not exactly the most encouraging recruiting policy. However, it was able to gather around 250,000 members to serve as Frateris militia, alongside a 1.5 million militia also made up of pilgrims. So in total, the Cardinal's army had roughly 3,810,000 direct troops, and the whole remaining population to call upon as soldiers. But there is one more force available for the Cardinal. Inside the deepest prisons on Vraks, there were many psychers held there until the Imperium came to collect them to ship them off to Terra. To show how the Cardinal was even more of a religious demagogue, he declared these psychers are his own children, and they will serve in his army. Despite the fact that in the 41st millennium, an unprotected psycher is asking for a demon incursion onto your world. But this tiny worry of a demon invasion did not bother the Cardinal, and thus these psychers joined the Renegades as fighters against the Imperium. So we have one army of fanatical soldiers completely unafraid of death as long as their objectives are achieved, and an army of religious zealots who believe they are in the right. Quite the good combination, isn't it? So now that we've spoken about the armies, let's talk about the plans for how the campaign would actually go. For the guardsmen from Krieg, the war would be focused on getting their artillery close enough to the Vraks fortress that held everything from the headquarters of the Planetary Defense Forces right down to the holy toilet the Cardinal Secretary shites in to blast the whole place and the holy toilet to Kingdom Come. Simple enough strategy, right? Except that the spot the Imperial bureaucrats had chosen as the starting landing zone on Vraks was located over 1,000 miles away from the Citadel, and there happened to be 3 main defensive lines built out from the Citadel blocking their way. Not so simple now, right? And before anyone asks, well, why did they not simply land their forces close enough to immediately start bombarding the fortress? Well, first off, because that would be too easy. And secondly, landing your forces smack dab in the middle of the enemy's extensive defenses is an okay strategy if you're looking to cause a bit of mayhem and trouble and then quickly get out, like Space Marines would, but it is absolutely the worst strategy if you are looking to set up a siege, because the most important thing needed for a siege is a secure supply line, and being right in the middle of enemy positions is not very conducive to ensuring a secure supply line. So that's why the Imperial Guard landed 1,000 miles away from their target 1 year before the actual start of the campaign. The 1st Regiment of Death Corps Guardsmen landed an entire year before the actual fighting began to start setting up the landing zone for the siege. To actually make this a nice process, a labor corps of 500,000 personnel was brought in from the nearby penal worlds of Arfista to set up railway lines and other depots for the beginning of the siege. Over the course of this 1 year, the Guardsmen's landing zone grew and the stockpile swelled as the Imperium got ready for the drag-out attritional fight that would soon come. And we will get to the opening phases of the siege in the next video. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. I hope you enjoyed it and will stick around to watch the next video of the Siege of Vraks. Please post in the comments any topics you would like me to talk about after I finish up this series of videos. And if you're still looking for more Warhammer videos, check out Arch Warhammer, 40k Theories, and Vaults of Terra for more Warhammer Lore videos. Links below in the description. And finally, if you want to see a good series of Warhammer stories, check out Ruva Alphabusa's channel, links below. All these guys have really good videos about Warhammer, and I highly recommend checking them out. Oh, and one last channel you should check out, Eliphas the Inheritor. Check him out, but also save a warp punch for him if he starts laughing. This is Wolf Corner, and I will see you next time. Have a good day.